Hey friends, Jeannie here. I hope you're having a great week. My week's been a little crazy because I'm getting ready for school to start next week, but I'm excited for week 4 of our devotional series. We're still talking about the Gospels. Last week we talked about the shortest Gospel, Mark, and this week we're going to talk about the longest Gospel. That's Luke. Luke is the longest gospel, and it's only part 1 of a 2-part series. Do you know what the second part of the series is? The other book written by Luke? If you said Acts, you're correct. The Acts of the Apostles. It's probably one of my favorite books of the Bible. And so we're talking about Luke, and Luke, the author of this gospel, was a doctor. And he wasn't one of the disciples, but he was really involved in ministry. He was a part of Paul's ministry team. And so he was around a lot of the events that were happening at the time, and he was familiar with the people connected to those events. And as a doctor, you would imagine he would be a pretty smart guy. And you're right, he was a really smart guy. And in the first few verses of chapter 1, he actually writes kind of the why and how and who his gospel's for. And so you see in verse 3, he says, having carefully investigated, now investigated sounds like a very doctory thing to me, having carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I also have decided to write an accurate account for you, Theophilus. So he's writing to a guy named Theophilus, or rather, he was commissioned by a guy named Theophilus to write a gospel for Gentiles. And Luke's often seen as a bridge between the Jews and the Gentiles. And one of this gospel's main purposes was to explain to the Gentiles the foundations of the Jewish faith. And that's exactly what it does. Another main purpose of this gospel is to convey this plodding along on the way to Jerusalem theme that you see. So Luke portrays Jesus. Remember we talked about every gospel kind of portraying Jesus as a different image. Luke portrays Jesus as a plodding ox. So think of what image comes to mind when you hear the words plodding ox. I personally think of Paul Bunyan and Babe the Blue Ox. Maybe the ox you're thinking of isn't blue, but you're probably thinking of this big, strong, powerful animal. Well, Luke portrays Jesus as this image of an ox, and from that we get the image of Jesus plodding along on the way to Jerusalem. And you also get images of power and strength and of work and wealth and sacrifice and the temple. Like an ox, Luke depicts Jesus as the bearer of burdens, caring for those who are burdened and suffering, and ultimately offering himself as a sacrifice. Thus, this gospel emphasizes Jesus' compassion and inclusiveness. It's a gospel for outsiders and outcasts, meant to reach the lost and the loneliest, and mostly to reach everybody. Luke 24 verse 47 says, "It was also written that this message would be proclaimed in the authority of his name to all the nations." Remember how earlier I said that this was part 1 of a 2-part series? Well, you see the same thing in part 2. In Acts 1 verse 8, you see, "But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses, telling people about me everywhere, in Jerusalem, throughout Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth." So in Luke, you have this on the way, plodding along theme from Galilee to Jerusalem, and you see the continuation of that in part 2 and in the book of Acts, and you see it in our lives today. Moving from Jerusalem then on to the ends of the earth. That's the main point, is this plodding along and then moving on from Jerusalem to the ends of the earth, to everywhere, to everyone. That's our calling. We are called to spread the gospel, the good news, to everyone. So go today and make that calling your calling. We're called to be a part of this, to share this good news, because the gospel is for everyone.